Hello, I'm David Hyde Pierce, and I bring greetings to all the advocates and board members and friends of the Alzheimer's Association and anyone watching tonight. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so honored to be able to speak to you tonight. I'm speaking especially to the advocates as I welcome you to this new Congress Advocacy Kickoff. I've been an advocate, I am an advocate, and I've been one for about 25 years. And I started, as many of you did, because I had lost family to Alzheimer's and dementia, my grandfather and my dad. So having lived through that, the Alzheimer's Association became a kind of family for me and extended a lifeline to me, to my family, to say we had lost those battles, but the war goes on and there was still something for us to do. And for many years, when I worked with the association as an advocate, I would say we made what I would call incremental progress. Small, steady gains in raising awareness and raising funds, especially for research. And then about 10 years ago, the association decided that they had to demand more from all of us, that they had to demand more from our government. And out of that need, the National Alzheimer's Project Act and the Alzheimer's Impact Movement were born. And I was lucky enough to be there at the birth. And I would say we went from incremental progress to monumental progress. So much has been accomplished in these 10 years. Since the passage of the NAPA Act, the funding for the National Institutes of Health has increased sevenfold. People living with dementia now have access to critical care and support services regardless of age. We are taking care of people with younger onset Alzheimer's. Medicare now covers critical care planning. And new resources are available to our nation's caregivers. This all came from the urgent advocacy of the Alzheimer's Association, of you and people like you. I can tell you specifically, I was on the advisory council to the National Alzheimer's Project Act, which was an amazing group of people in government and out of government, people from all different walks of life, advising on how this plan should evolve and be carried out. And one of the things we fought for was research, not just into treatment, not just into finding a cure, but research into care. We wanted to find the best practices, the best way to take care of people, and the best way to take care of caregivers. And that's what we're doing today. There's still much more work to do. We know that. NAPA and AIM were both game changers. But this game, if you can call it that, is far from over. And that's where you come in. This evening is all about you, all about what you have done and what you are about to do. And as I say, I am so grateful and proud to be even a small part of all of our work together. So now I want to get the evening started, and I am going to turn the program over to tonight's moderator, John Funderburk, who is Vice President of Advocacy, Alzheimer's Association, and Alzheimer's Impact Movement, and he's going to take us through the program this evening. John, take us away.
David, thank you so much for those inspiring words and that introduction, and for all you do as an Alzheimer's advocate. Good evening again, and welcome to our new Congress Advocacy Kickoff. We're thrilled to have you all join us tonight as we celebrate historic policy victories, and we look forward to strengthening our movement in the year ahead. We're joined tonight by advocates, association staff, and community partners from across the country. New and longtime volunteer advocates who work every day to make Alzheimer's disease a national priority. I especially want to welcome the many organizations who partner with us, including the National African Methodist Episcopal, or AME Church, who's working with us to educate and engage their 2 million members in the fight against Alzheimer's. Before we get into the heart of tonight's program, just some quick housekeeping. First, if you have technical difficulties like your screen freezes or audio issues, please know it might be on our end and not your computer. We appreciate your Zoom patience as we continue to adapt to the virtual world. Next, we only have an hour with you tonight, and while we don't have time for questions and answers during this program, I want to encourage each of you to reach out to your Alzheimer's Association public policy staff in your state for any follow-up questions. I know most of you are familiar with these amazing staff partners, and I invite all of you to work with them throughout this year as we press congressional and state lawmakers for needed Alzheimer's and dementia policies. Now, you just heard from David. It was 10 years ago that, thanks to our advocacy, there was a major turning point and a catalyst for change with the passage of the National Alzheimer's Project Act, or NAPA. NAPA created the first national Alzheimer's plan to fight Alzheimer's disease, and thanks to the work of you and so many advocates, we've seen historic change take place in Alzheimer's and dementia policy since its passage. We've put together a terrific video for you tonight highlighting NAPA's accomplishments. After that video, you're going to hear from Rob Egge, our Chief Policy Officer for the Association and AIM's Executive Director, about our federal policy victories. Now let's take a look at what we've accomplished since the passage of NAPA.
Good evening, and my thanks also to David Hyde Pierce for a great Advocacy Forum series of 2021. Thank you all for being here this evening. We so appreciate you joining us. For those of you who are new to advocacy, a special greeting. We're so glad you're here to learn more about how we can advance our mission through advocacy together. We hope that you're intrigued by why you're here tonight and that you decide to dive right in at the state and the federal level to join us in advocating for important new priorities. We are glad you're with us. And for those of you who are returning advocates, thank you for what you accomplished this past year. It was just remarkable. I know I don't have to tell anyone on this call, on this video, what a challenging year 2020 was. And I know, especially for some of you, tremendously difficult and challenging. In spite of that, all of you together continue to advocate despite all those challenges, in ways that showed your determination, your creativity, and your insight in ways to overcome barriers to still communicate our message to state and federal officials. And the impacts were so clear. In 2020, at state level, we had many important victories across the country. At the federal level, I would say that 2020 probably has been our most productive Congress, our most productive year with Congress ever. We had 3 major legislative priorities in this past year. Each and every one of them was enacted into law thanks to your hard, effective work. I'm speaking of the Younger Onset for Alzheimer's Act, the Promoting Alzheimer's Awareness to Prevent Elder Abuse Act, and the Improving Hope for Alzheimer's Act. You can be sure that we are now working with agencies to make sure these bills are enacted effectively and swiftly so the benefits that you've made possible are delivered as soon as they can. In addition to that, you also, as we've heard already tonight, secured a major increase in Alzheimer's research funding of $300 million, which now brings us, as has been noted, a 7-fold increase over the last decade to now $3.1 billion each year, Alzheimer's and dementia research. And alongside that, you also secured a 50% increase to a new program started because of the work we did together to ensure the passage of the Bold Infrastructure for Alzheimer's Act. And with that increase, we'll be taking further strides to make Alzheimer's and dementia a true public health priority, not just at the federal level with the CDC, but also in states and localities across the country. All of this is due to your hard work, and we thank you so much for it. But if one message I have this evening is thank you, the other is just as simple and straightforward. It's we need you. We need you to continue this advocacy. Momentum matters in a lot of endeavors, but it doesn't really matter with policymakers. No matter how successful we've been in the past, including this last year, if we don't continue to push, our momentum, our progress will stop in its tracks almost immediately. That's especially true in a year like 2021. I have a lot of sympathy for federal and state policymakers who are trying to make good decisions, and they are going to face an avalanche of competing significant issues that are vying for their attention and vying to get on their agendas, not just on the agenda of a policymaker, but at the top. Because in a year like 2021, with all they'll be facing, if you're not at the top of a policymaker's agenda, you're likely to be overlooked. And we can't afford that to happen for Alzheimer's and other dementias and the progress we need to continue to make. I know when I advocate, when I send a tweet, when I maybe respond to an action alert, when I make a phone call, join a virtual meeting, and hopefully one day soon again, safely join in-person meetings with legislatures, it's possible to wonder legitimately, did that particular action make a difference? Did they listen? Will it sink in? And while that is a good question perhaps to ask it about any particular action, an understandable question, we know that it does matter. We know that cumulatively, there's no doubt that the power of your advocacy shines through in results like we saw last year. And it will continue to matter again in this year ahead of us when we're going to be pursuing some exciting and important new priorities that I can't wait to get through this Congress, just like in states across the country, the priorities we have in each and every state. So I am looking forward to joining with you. I know that if we continue to be relentless, we will be relevant. We will be at the top of these agendas. But if we don't, we won't. That's our challenge. I know we'll rise to it because we always have thanks to you and your determination. And together through our advocacy, we're going to bring ourselves that much closer, that much sooner to our shared vision of a world without Alzheimer's and other dementia. So again, thank you for being with us tonight. And John, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob, for those remarks and for reminding us how much we have all achieved together. We know that Alzheimer's affects everybody, but each of us have come to this movement for different reasons. In just a moment, on the right side of your screen, you'll see a notification that our first poll question is live. Tonight, we want to hear from you throughout this call. So, our first question is, why are you an Alzheimer's advocate? For some of you, you may have lost someone to the disease. For others, you might currently be a caregiver. Others, you might be living with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia yourself. Let us know tonight why you're an advocate, and we're going to come back in just a little bit to check out those results. Now, while we celebrated our successes and commemorated historic policy achievements, we know, as Rob said, we have so much more to do. We also have an opportunity to continue our momentum with the new 117th Congress. Recently, I sat down with my colleague, Rachel Conant, our Vice President of Federal Affairs and the Association and AIM's top staff member working with our federal lawmakers. We talked about the association's federal policy agenda and what we hope to accomplish in Congress. Take a look. Rachel, we've achieved another important increase in federal funding for Alzheimer's and other dementia in 2020. Rachel, we've achieved another important increase in federal funding for Alzheimer's and other dementia in 2020, thanks to the work of advocates. Annual funding now stands at $3.1 billion. Additionally, advocates were successful in securing $15 million to fund the BOLD Act. Do you expect the association and AIM to pursue additional increases in funding in 2021? And if so, how can advocates help?
Thank you so much, John. And absolutely, we're going to continue. We're not going to let up. We're going to keep our foot on the pedal, and we will absolutely be pushing Congress to make sure that we have increased funding for Alzheimer's and dementia research at the NIH. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank all the advocates nationwide for your passion and dedication and not giving up last year. It was a tough year for all of us, but we saw that great victory at the end of the year where we are now at $3.1 billion annually at the NIH. And we've seen scientific advances start to catch up with the more than seven-fold increase in funding at the NIH since the enactment of NAPA in 2010. We're starting to see the identification of new biomarkers, progress towards new diagnostic tools, and for the first time in more than a decade, a new treatment for cognitive decline related to Alzheimer's is being reviewed by the FDA as we speak. However, as we all know, there's still so much more that we need to do. As the US population continues to age, that is the greatest factor for Alzheimer's, and we're only going to see our need even more for that funding. So we're going to be going to Congress relatively soon with all of your help to make sure that we see that continued robust funding at the NIH, which we know we need to take every shot on goal to get us to where we are in a world without Alzheimer's. With regard to BOLD, the Bold Infrastructure for Alzheimer's Act, the pandemic has really underscored the need for a strong public health infrastructure. And that's only become more important as people affected by the disease continues to grow. So we'll need to see those interventions and different types of information coming out of those public centers of excellence, which are just getting off the ground now. We saw an initial $10 million in fiscal year 2020. And just last year, of course, we saw $15 million for fiscal year 2021. And the Alzheimer's Association is so excited that we are now going to be leading the Center for Risk Reduction. All these are great steps forward, but again, more needs to be done, and we need to ensure that we have robust, continued funding at the CDC to make sure that we get those critical interventions in place and that they're dispersed across the country to all populations. So yes, John, we will be going up to the Hill, and we're going to be relying on all of you to bring your passion and dedication and your fight to make sure that Congress hears us loud and clear in the 117th.
That's excellent, and such great news, and a testament to the work that advocates and you and your team are doing on Capitol Hill. The next question is the association and AIM are making great progress in public policies that also impact care and support at the state and federal levels, but we know so much more needs to be done. Are we going to see legislation in Congress this year that may affect how families access and provide care?
Another great question, and yes, you're right, so much is needed, and our advocates around the country know that. You know, we heard earlier that we again had some great victories in care and support with the enactment of the Improving Hope for Alzheimer's Act, and thanks again to all of you across the country for making that happen. And our advocates know all too well that individuals living with dementia and their caregivers are many times left to navigate the complicated healthcare system on their own. That's something that my family and I had to deal with my grandparents, and it's something that we want to make sure is addressed. The need is urgent, and it's something that we're going to make sure is before the Congress relatively soon. You know, whether it's medication management, managing other chronic conditions, whether it's hypertension, diabetes, you know, going to other specialists, you know, caregivers need a lot of support and much, much more beyond even just medical support. So this Congress, we're excited to be working with bipartisan congressional champions in both the House and Senate on ways to streamline dementia care management to really improve the quality of dementia care while also reducing costs. We're excited to be working on a new bill that will be looking to overhaul how care is delivered and how it's paid for. The needs of families affected by dementia can be extensive, as I said. They change over time and go beyond just medical care. And right now, the current reimbursement system doesn't pay for that. And if it does, it's also fragmented. And we want to make sure that providers are being reimbursed for value of care, not necessarily volume of care. So our approach is going to be to create a model to bundle all of those services that are important to our families and their caregivers, and to make sure that clinicians can easily deliver them. So we're excited to unveil this bill in a few weeks, and we'll have all of you taking that up to your members of Congress to ensure that we really rework this maze that is our healthcare system to really have a great impact on those with the disease and also their families.
That's excellent news, and we really look forward to learning a lot more about that critical legislation. What else will the association and AIM be focusing on in this new Congress?
Well, there's so much that we really have to tackle this Congress, and we're going to make sure that Capitol Hill hears this loud and clear. We know that the pandemic has had a terrible impact on individuals living with dementia and their caregivers, especially those living in long-term care communities. We know that Congress is currently working on a new COVID-19 package. The new Biden administration has also unveiled their points that they want to tackle in this arena as well. So we'll continue to work with the new Congress as we did last year. And I know we heard from members of Congress, they heard all of you loud and clear that the impact of COVID-19 was having on all of you. So we want to make sure that we're addressing the needs of these long-term care communities and making sure that they get the resources they need, whether it's testing, strike teams, PPE, as well as ways to safely ensure that facilities are open to allow visitation. We know that has taken a unique and devastating toll on our families. And, of course, we know and we have seen that the pandemic has further exposed the health differences and disparities that exist between racial and ethnic groups due to economic and social conditions. Alzheimer's disproportionately affects older Black and Hispanic Americans. In fact, Black Americans are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's, and Hispanic Americans are 1 to 2 times more likely to develop disease. So despite this burden, despite these numbers that we know that these communities are grossly underrepresented in dementia research. So the Alzheimer's Association and AIM are committed to the inclusion of all these communities and the advancement of health equity. So this is going to continue to be a critical focus for us in the 117th Congress. And we also know that it's critically important to ensure that the policies we're working toward, whether that's research, care, support, or other issues, reaches all individuals impacted by dementia. So advocates should stay tuned to have these priorities rolled out. We really want to make sure that we stay focused on the idea that there should be access across all populations, and that will be a top priority for us during the 117th Congress.
Rachel, thank you so much. This is fantastic information, and we really look forward to hearing more about our key policies that we're going to be working on Capitol Hill in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you just heard from Rachel, we have exciting opportunities this year to make Alzheimer's a national priority and keep the momentum going for that needed research, as well as policies that will help caregivers and people living with the disease. Now, earlier we asked you, why are you an advocate? And on the right side of your screen, you can click to see the results. Here's what you had to say. It looks like most of you, a vast majority of you, have lost someone to the disease. Now, not surprisingly, we have a true cross-section of advocates who come to this movement, each of you armed with your most powerful tool. That's your personal story. Some of you are discovering advocacy for the first time tonight, and many others have been a part of this movement for years. So for our next poll question, we want to know, how long have you been an Alzheimer's advocate? I know some of you are, again, just getting started out. A few of you have just been doing this for a couple of years, or like David Hyde Pierce, you've been doing this for decades. So let us know how long you've been an Alzheimer's advocate, and we're going to come back in just a few minutes and take a look at those poll results. Now, while 2020 was a year unlike any other in our nation's history, we are so proud of the work that AIM and advocates did to make Alzheimer's a rising bipartisan issue in the 2020 elections. Recently, I sat down with Joel Payne. He's a CBS News political contributor to discuss what the election results mean for Alzheimer's policy in 2021. Here's our conversation. We're joined today by Joel Payne, CBS News political contributor, to talk about the 2020 elections and the impact they'll have. We're joined today by Joel Payne, CBS News political contributor, to talk about the 2020 elections and the impact they'll have on our nation's capital this year. Joel, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
John, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So with this week's certification before Congress, Joe Biden became the 46th president of the United States, and history was made when Kamala Harris became the first female, first African-American, and first Indian American vice president. Joel, what type of impact do you think the new Biden-Harris administration is going to have on the political landscape in Washington this year?
Those are some really good questions, John. So look, there's the obvious history that's going to be made, and that's always significant, and that's always something that's important to remark upon. But I think something that jumps out to me is just the way that Washington works is going to be fundamentally different than it was the last 4 years. Obviously, President Trump and his administration worked in a very non-traditional way. Advocacy was applied in a very non-traditional way and fashion under the Trump administration. That is going to be fundamentally different under Joe Biden. Joe Biden has been in and out of Washington, D.C. for the last 45 plus years. He served as a senator, as vice president. He understands legislation in ways that really, we haven't had a president understand it like that, probably since George H.W. Bush. He's probably the person entering the presidency with the most experience since him. And so I think you're going to have a very seasoned political operation out of that White House. I think you factor that in with the fact that, Joe Biden has really spent a lot of his time, particularly as vice president, focused on issues related to healthcare. You'll remember, Joe Biden played a really substantial role in leading the 21st Century Cures Initiative, which focused on a number of illnesses and diseases, including Alzheimer's. And I think one of the things that the association should feel really good about is that you've probably got a very sympathetic ear and a good friend in the White House in Joe Biden, and you're going to have a pretty supportive Congress. You're going to have a supportive Congress in any direction because, one of the things the association does a really good job of is working across the aisle. But I do think that in this moment where we understand the importance of investment in healthcare, when we're in the midst of a pandemic, I think the association is well positioned as well.
No, that's excellent. And you talked about that relationship that the association and our advocates have built on Capitol Hill, working in a bipartisan way. 2020 was another change election in Congress. We saw the Democrats take control of the Senate. Democrats also lost seats in the House of Representatives. Those numbers have really tightened this year. Talk to us about how that election, how that will impact Congress, and what should Alzheimer's advocates keep in mind as they work with members and their congressional staff?
Well, it's interesting. So look, there's a couple of things we should probably address here. One, obviously we're having this conversation in the wake of some really difficult events on Capitol Hill a few days ago. And I know I speak on behalf of the association when I just say how devastated we all feel about what happened, the dishonor that was brought upon that institution, and also just the concern about injuries and loss of life and bad behavior, illegal behavior. I know I'm speaking to folks who have shared concerns about that, and I do think that is probably going to have some lingering impact on the state of Congress. I think that you might see people more willing to work together. I think something that the association should feel good about, again, is your model is built on working across the aisle, not just working with Democrats or just working with Republicans or just working with people from the coast or from big cities. You've really built a great coalition of champions that span the country and that span demographic breakdown. And so I think the association really probably near the top of any type of association of your kind in town is probably really well positioned to exist in this environment. You talk about 2020, and look, it was a very tumultuous year, primarily because of the coronavirus pandemic. And we know that the population that the association supports was disproportionately impacted, elder Americans. And, I'm sure it's going to be at the top of Congress's agenda to make sure that, folks who come from those populations are not forgotten and are provided the type of care and support that they need. And I think that's going to extend to diseases like Alzheimer's, which I'm sure it is complicated to care for and to attempt to manage in this type of an environment.
Mm-hmm. One quick follow-up, so based on something you talked about, just in terms of control of specifically the Senate. It's going to be very tight. Independents, moderates, And of course, the vice president will be a tiebreaker. How do you think that that process is going to impact the Democrats' agenda?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, John, the last time I worked in Congress, it was the last time Democrats had unified control of government. It was 2009, 10, and 11. And you saw Democrats in a pretty similar position then than they are now. There was a crisis. There was an economic crisis primarily going on back then. We're in a coronavirus crisis now. So there were things that kind of were brought to that Congress and that administration that they had to address off the top. And I think Joe Biden and, now Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Speaker Pelosi and the leadership on both sides are going to be confronted with similar problems that they're going to have to address. They're going to have to extend more money for stimulus. They're going to have to probably provide some fixes around healthcare. They're going to have to do some things to the tax code to free up more money to address some of the things that have gone unaddressed over the last year or that require more support, state and local support, things of that nature. So they're going to have to do some of those things. And I think that you will see both the Biden administration and the leadership in Congress go pretty aggressively after those things. You also have to remember, in a new Congress, whatever the breakdown is, if it's close like it's going to be now, or if it's a big margin that Democrats had 10 years ago, that you have a pretty short window. And John, I'm sure you know this very well. You have a pretty short window to work within where you've got political capital to spend. Joe Biden's going to have a mandate, and he's going to have kind of clear direction from the American people based off of the last election of what to do. And I think he's going to want to do it quickly. That expires. There is an expiration date on that political capital, as I'm sure you know very well. And I think the Biden administration is going to be really focused on that. Just to the point about being in kind of such a close, 50-50 Congress, where literally Kamala Harris as a Democrat will be the tie-breaking vote. It's so funny because there was so much emphasis put on that race in Georgia. And look, it is a better world for Chuck Schumer, for Democrats to be the majority leader than to be the minority leader. It's worlds apart in terms of chairmanships and, just resources, right? Things of that nature, staffing. But the governing scenario is really not that different because it's still a close governing scenario where Democrats and Republicans are going to have to work together. Unless there are major changes to how the chamber works, particularly in the Senate, talking about the filibuster rule, you're going to have bipartisan agreement in order to get anything done. And that includes on issues like Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's support and Alzheimer's research. So, I folks like me spend a lot of time in their career going on TV and talking about this stuff. And it's interesting to follow. But I think the governing scenario is going to be a little bit more similar than people realize from what it would have been even had, Senator-elect Warnock and Senator-elect Ossoff not been successful in Georgia. I think the chamber is still going to be controlled by the moderates, by the people in the middle, people like, probably a Roy Blunt, a Susan Collins, a Mitt Romney, Joe Manchin, Chris Coons, folks like that who at any point can grab colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are similarly moderate and either put a stop to something or, build support for something. The chamber is probably going to be controlled by those folks just by that definition of that type of a close margin.
Yeah. These are excellent insights. Thank you so much. And we've got a busy year. Our advocates have a lot of work to do. Joe, we really appreciate you being with us, and thank you again for everything.
Appreciate you. Just really quick, John, this issue is super personal to me. I'm the grandson of a former Alzheimer's patient. This is near and dear to my heart, and I know the work that you guys do is so important to so many millions of Americans. So thanks for letting me be a part of this discussion.
We appreciate your time. Thanks again.
My name is Nelita Byfield Cash, and I am the Alzheimer's Ambassador for Oklahoma District Number 2. And I'd like to share with you why I advocate for the Alzheimer's Association. My dad was one of 16 children. And of those 16 children, my dad and 7 of his siblings were lost to Alzheimer's disease, as well as his dad passing away in 1954, showing all signs of having Alzheimer's disease, although he didn't have the diagnosis. So I advocate to honor my dad and his family. My mom was my dad's caregiver. They were married for 58 years. And my mom passed away almost exactly 3 months to the day after my dad. And I do believe it was the caregiver fatigue and stress that contributed to my mom's death. We also lost my mom's sister-in-law to Alzheimer's disease. So I advocate to honor my mom and her family. My brother Steve married Norma in 1982. Norma has been a part of my life since I was 12 years old, and now she has early onset Alzheimer's and does not remember me. We've been told she has about 6 months left. So I advocate for my sister-in-law Norma and my late brother Steve. Alzheimer's has taken 3 of my first cousins, Joe, Florence, and Eugene, and now a 4th has been diagnosed. It's in my generation. So I advocate for the future of my cousins. I teach school in Oklahoma. I've taught here for 14 years, and I've spent 11 of those years teaching school children about Alzheimer's disease. And my school advocates right by my side. We do 80s for Alzheimer's dances, penny drives. We wear purple every Tuesday for those that are affected by Alzheimer's disease. My students tell me, Ms. Cash, we're going to find a cure for you, and I believe them. So I advocate for my school. My husband, David, and I have 6 children and 11 grandchildren, and we've made wonderful memories over the years. I don't want them to lose those memories, so I advocate for my husband and for our family. And now me, I'm 51 years old, and Alzheimer's has been a part of my vocabulary for 30 years, since my first aunt was diagnosed. It is a monster that lives under my bed, and it chases me in my nightmares. So why do I advocate for the Alzheimer's Association and a cure? Why wouldn't I?
Nelita, thank you so much for sharing why you're an advocate in this fight. And thanks to Joel Payne for giving us the insider's view of the Washington landscape. Now, a few minutes ago, we asked, how long have you been involved as an Alzheimer's advocate? Here's what you had to say. Looks like, almost very close between 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5, and 5 to 10, with just an edge for those who've been advocating for 3 to 5 years. So it's exciting, though, to see so many longtime advocates joined by new ones tonight. And, you know, as the case was through most of 2020, much of this year's advocacy is going to take place on digital and virtual platforms. But as we saw last year, and as Rob said, that is not going to slow us down. So we know that when elected officials vote on key legislation, they're not thinking about facts and figures or statistics. They're thinking about you and your story. Over the holidays, I sat down with Brad Fitch. He's the president and CEO of the Congressional Management Foundation, who partners with the Alzheimer's Association, and he shared some great advocate tips, including how sharing your story with policymakers can make an impact in 2021. Take a look. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're joined by Brad Fitch, President and CEO of the Congressional Management Foundation, to talk about how Capitol Hill is working in 2021 and how they're engaging with constituents. So Brad, let's get down to it. And the first question that I have is, how has Congress changed the way they interact with constituents over the last year? And what should advocates expect as they engage in 2021?
Thanks, John, and thanks for inviting me onto this program. Congress pivoted actually quite well for an institution that isn't known for rapidly changing operations in late March when it had to go completely remote. And it is still engaging constituents in a very robust way. The Congressional Management Foundation did a survey of congressional staff over the summer to examine how remote operations specifically was affecting how they interacted with constituents. It's no surprise that a significant percentage of staff said that members of Congress are not doing in-person meetings, and that is continued through the end of the year. But the findings also show that they are doing remote meetings through Zoom and through old-fashioned phone conference calls very well. And the number of online and telephone town hall meetings has gone up exponentially. Now, what this means for the new year for advocates is members of Congress are going to be ready with remote advocacy and remote engagement starting in January when the new Congress is sworn in. So look for those opportunities to engage with lawmakers, especially in telephone and online town hall meetings. That means if you get an email invite from your member of Congress or your senator to invite you to one of these meetings, please take advantage of it and get on that call. Try to ask a question as early as possible. The average number of people in a telephone or online town hall meeting for a member of the House of Representatives can be 3,000 to 7,000 people, and they only get about 10 calls in that 1 hour. So if you ask that question about Alzheimer's research, or tell a story about how your loved one is being affected by this horrible disease, you're going to put that member of Congress on the record with thousands of their constituents. That's like hammering in cement. So it's a great opportunity to build your brand with the lawmaker, build the Alzheimer's Association's brand with lawmakers, and get them on the record. So look for those opportunities to engage remotely. Next, we'd also say, consider remote advocacy in the sense that you can have meetings with the lawmaker or their staff using remote activities. So you can request a video chat with the lawmaker. Bring on people from throughout the district, because you don't have to travel to the one location. You can do it remotely. That also gives you some more flexibility. It's kind of making lemonade out of these lemons that we've been served here. So engage with the lawmaker using other types of tools like Zoom, like MS Teams, which the House of Representatives use, or WebEx, which is the preferred tool of the United States Senate. But everybody, frankly, is using Zoom, just like the Congress is just like everybody else. So keep in mind those remote advocacy capabilities are available to you.
That's great advice. And, you talked about different tools. Of course, social media continues to be a powerful tool of how and ways to communicate with Congress. What guidance would you give to advocates who are listening in tonight and who are looking to engage through social media? What advice would you give them to engage through those platforms?
Well, just as we've seen with Zoom and video chats, any type of non-direct, non-personal interaction is going to be amplified right now, and working with the Congress and social media is no different. The social media tools primarily used by the Congress, of course, are Facebook and Twitter, and a little bit to a lesser extent, Instagram. Facebook actually has a town hall meeting tool that members of Congress like because A, it lets them with a distinct group of people like on a Facebook group and page, and B, it's free. So members do like using Facebook and Twitter. Our research also shows from surveying congressional staff, it doesn't take a lot of people to get the attention of lawmakers. Basically anywhere between 6 and 10 people, if they send a tweet all around the same time, that'll get to the communications director's attention, and that'll get to the legislative director's attention, and probably all the way up to the member. So just organizing a few people, but you've got to do it around the same time. You send 6 tweets over 6 months, no one's going to pay attention. You send 6 tweets over 60 minutes or over 2 or 3 hours, it is going to get the attention of lawmakers. It's also important when you engage in social media to identify yourself as a constituent and to affiliate yourself with the Alzheimer's Association. Our research shows that when they have that kind of context, your power actually rises because they understand that you're with not just yourself or your family, but a group of constituents in their district that you, in essence, are being a voice for. So always identify yourself as a constituent. If it takes a couple of tweets, that's okay. Use a little extra time, but that's a really important component of good advocacy.
Great advice. Brad, you know this best. There are a lot of new faces on Capitol Hill in the 117th Congress. What advice would you give to advocates who have a new member of Congress on how to engage with their office?
Well, first, when you're working with a freshman lawmaker, you've got to be a little more patient. They get handed the keys to the office about 1 minute after they swear an oath on the Bible, and that's it. It's not a lot of time to ramp up. They will not be fully staffed until mid to late March. They may not have a legislative assistant for healthcare that will be covering your issue until that time. So that's the first thing, is to be a little patient. Second, your first port of call with a freshman office probably this year should be the district office staff, the district director. And shockingly, that district director is going to very much want to get to know you. You're a very high profile association and group that is working on an incredibly important issue that affects so many people in our country. They're going to want to get to know you, but don't necessarily think you have to go to the Washington office. Now, I know Alzheimer's Association is going to be doing some work throughout the year, organizing meetings with lawmakers, including freshmen, and definitely engage and be included in those efforts. That's essential. But if you do talk to an office early on and they haven't hired their staff yet that covers healthcare, that's perfectly okay. Just don't pressure them. Make a note to get back with them maybe in March and say, okay, after your LA for healthcare is hired, I'll make sure we make a contact with them and get to know them. And then finally, especially early on in the first couple of months, social media and the tools that member used during the campaign will still be active and used during December, January, February, while they're getting their official tools set up. So believe it or not, that's another way. Go ahead and use Facebook Instant Messenger as a tool to connect with those freshman lawmakers before they have their official apparatus set up.
So finally today, we've got a lot of longtime advocates who have been Alzheimer's advocates for many, many years, but we also have tonight a number of new advocates who are joining us for the first time. Are there some top tips that you'd give a new advocate to help them as they begin to engage elected officials and their staff?
Well, first to the new advocates, thank you very much for your commitment. Some of you may not know this, but I am one of you myself. My father suffered from dementia many years, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Next, keep in mind this is a longer term commitment, so you're going to want to plan on engaging lawmakers a few times during the year. That doesn't mean you're becoming a full-time lobbyist. It means you're becoming a superb citizen advocate, and that's what we need. Next, do a little research on your member of Congress. See if there's a connection that they may have had. It may be one article that's buried in, some Google search that takes you a little longer to do, but try to identify if that lawmaker or their family has some connection to Alzheimer's or dementia or some other long-term illness that might be something that draws a connection between you and them. We've shown in our research that those people that draw those connections are much more persuasive, much more powerful than people who do not. And then finally, think of the various tools available to you in the Citizen Advocate Toolkit you have. You can email the staff. You can meet with the district director. You can set up Zoom meetings with the member of Congress and other Alzheimer Association members in your state. You can even write a letter to the editor. You can thank that lawmaker for supporting an increase in funding for Alzheimer's research. And I got to tell you, I worked 13 years on Capitol Hill, and most of that time as a press secretary. If we ever got a letter to the editor praising our member of Congress and our boss, that went to the top of the pile. You walked it into the office to show the senator, look at what happened. You stopped the day because they get more death threats than thank you notes. So getting a letter to the editor, thanking that lawmaker for supporting your cause is just gold from a citizen advocate's perspective.
Brad, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate all your expert advice. It's fantastic to be a continued partner with the Congressional Management Foundation, and we appreciate all your work and wise words tonight. Thank you. As you just heard Brad say, Congress is adapting the way it's engaging with constituents, which provides us opportunities to deliver our message. Of course, our movement doesn't just work with leaders in Congress. Thanks to the work of advocates, our message is being heard in state capitals in all 50 states. Advocates are building relationships with key state leaders and advancing critical legislation that's impacting the lives of millions of Americans. So now it's my pleasure to introduce one of the association's great champions in state government, Juliana Stratton, the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. My presence today, my purpose in life, my memory of my mom are all dedicated to the fight against Alzheimer's disease. I applaud all of your advocacy work in making Alzheimer's disease a top priority for elected officials across the nation. I'm sorry that I was not able to join you last year at the 2020 AIM Advocacy Forum, but I know that you had everyone's health and safety in mind as the pandemic was just getting underway. However, that did not stop you from making a huge impact on Alzheimer's policy throughout our country last year. From the halls of Congress to the capitals in all 50 states, your voices made a difference and continue to make a difference in how we as elected officials work to end Alzheimer's. Each one of your calls, emails, Zoom meetings, text, and tweets made a difference and helped change the trajectory of battling this devastating disease. Just before COVID-19 turned our world upside down, I was traveling the state to listen to caregivers to get a better understanding of their needs. My story was their story. As I cared for my mom, Velma, I knew what it was like to wish I had more resources or support. I knew what it was like to wish leaders would pay more attention to the stresses and financial strain of caregiving. And I knew what it was like to rely on the Alzheimer's Association helpline that helped me navigate what was often a difficult journey. This year, you have the opportunity to keep the momentum going in Washington and in your own state. We've seen historic increases in federal funding for Alzheimer's research and passage of critical Alzheimer's legislation in Congress and state legislatures. But we know that there is still so much more work to do. I want to encourage all of you to make your voices heard this year, not just with members of Congress, but leaders in your own state. You know, one of my favorite days of the Illinois legislative session is when the Alzheimer's Association advocates come to the Capitol dressed in their purple to tell my colleagues their stories and what Illinois lawmakers need to do as it relates to Alzheimer's. Thanks to advocates like you in my home state, Illinois is making great strides to prioritize early detection and diagnosis. I wish you all well this year and look forward to the next forum when we can join together in person. Until then, keep up the great fight and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Stratton, for those kind words and for all of your leadership on Alzheimer's disease in Illinois. So for our final question tonight, we'd like to hear what is your favorite way, whether it's in a pandemic or not, to engage and communicate with your elected officials. Again, you can check out the poll on the right side of your screen. What is your favorite way to engage with your elected official? It might be meeting in person. Maybe you like to tweet at them. For some of you, you really like Zoom, or you don't have Zoom fatigue yet. Let us know, and we're going to get back to you in just a few minutes. As David said earlier, our event tonight is all about you, Alzheimer's advocates, who give so much towards creating our vision of a world without Alzheimer's or other dementia. It's my great honor now to introduce two incredible advocates who are making their voices heard with their members of Congress and their state representatives. Recently, I sat down with these two advocate leaders to talk about what inspires them and how they face challenges and create successes in their own advocacy work. Take a look. We're excited for our panel tonight with advocates from across the country who've been working to make Alzheimer's a top issue with their elected leaders. Like all of you watching tonight, these panelists have different stories and journeys, but a common passion for advocacy and making an impact through their own voices. Jeff Borghoff is an ACT team member and state champion from New Jersey who's been active for many years with the association in the Garden State. And Jeff was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's disease at age 51. Lauren Kovach is an ambassador from Michigan and has an amazing Alzheimer's congressional team assigned to one of our key champions in the United States Congress. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight. Jeff, you've been active both at the congressional and state level as an advocate. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the work that you do as a state advocate for the association and how you work with state elected officials in New Jersey?
Thanks, John, for having me and allowing me to speak with you. My state advocacy and my congressional advocacy is probably one of the most important things that I contribute to with the Alzheimer's Association, starting way back when I was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. We can really make a very strong impact with policy and legislation for the Alzheimer's Association and its sister group of the Alzheimer's Impact. And it's truly important because that's how we make change. That's how we facilitate change with Alzheimer's disease and families who are affected by Alzheimer's disease. I got involved, like I said, very quickly because I saw that on the table when I first entered into the group being diagnosed in 2016, that there was some substantial legislation on the table that I could get involved in right away. And I always say that when a person is diagnosed with or is living with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, they immediately become subject matter experts. And when they bring their voices to the table, they are able to empower the rest of the group with an additional voice and bring that expertise of living with the disease.
Lauren, you lead an amazing Alzheimer's congressional team for Senator Stabenow in Michigan. You all were the team of the year last year. Tell us a little bit about how you and your team work with Senator Stabenow and her staff. What has made your team so successful?
I think the key for us, the number one thing is engage. And we don't always want to be just asking, we want to think as well. So all of us stay in touch with Senator Stabenow and all of her staff throughout the entire year. And it always doesn't have to be just about Alzheimer's. For example, Christmas time, we live in Michigan, so we live near one of the most famous Christmas shops in the world. So we sent a little purple bulb that was personalized with Senator Stabenow, #EndAlz.
Lauren, what's been your most inspiring moment as an Alzheimer's advocate?
There is one instance that completely stands out. It might always stand out to me. A group of us had been interacting with a member of Congress who we felt wasn't very responsive to us, and there was a certain Alzheimer's bill we were really trying to pass. We kind of made the joke that we had to travel to DC to visit this person, even though their office was a mile from my house. So it was probably about 7 months in of emails, of tweets, of letters, of you name it. And I got a phone call at work one day from a staffer in DC, and he said, "Hey, I was just calling to let you know personally, we're gonna co-sponsor Pachita." And I said, "What? We haven't heard from you in 7 months." But he said, "Yeah, we saw your letter to the editor that was in the newspaper yesterday." So the whole team, the ambassador to this team, we just thought, wow, so 7 months, even though we heard nothing back, they got all those tweets, they got those emails, they got those messages. And so as frustrating as it was, don't ever feel defeated and know that they're still listening to us.
Jeff, as someone who was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's disease, you have a very unique perspective. And as you talk to members of Congress and state leaders, I know how much you share that as part of your story in working with them. What advice do you have for those who are living with Alzheimer's disease? How can they lift their voice and make a difference as advocates?
Certainly. As I had said, that when we are living with this disease, we go through a process of becoming subject matter experts, along with our care partners or caregivers. And so when we come and we meet with congressional members or state assembly and Senate members, what we do is we bring a personal story. And that personal story can be very engaging, sometimes very sorrowful, but it also can be very empowering. It can be empowering to ourselves, and it can be empowering to the teams that we're working with, and really help move legislation forward. So the most important thing is to realize that you have a voice that you are able to use to help with regard to legislation at the state and federal level. And I implore everyone to really step up and use their voice to do so. I always say that to lead from where you stand, and that's one of the most important things that you can do as a Alzheimer's advocate.
Jeff, you are a state champion advocate in the state of New Jersey. I know you do a lot of work with members of the New Jersey State Assembly and the New Jersey State Senate there. Can you talk tonight a little bit about how do you work with state elected officials? What are some of the advocacy work that you do in New Jersey in that role?
First of all, the state champion program was created so individuals like myself and others within our district could create a stronger relationship with our assembly persons and our senator. And that's a program that's working out rather well. And so what it does is it allows us to build that relationship, keep lines of communication open, work with them on different policies and procedures, and allow us to basically to keep the ball moving forward on policies and legislation that are so significant to those of us living with with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia in our state. So it's really critical within all of our states to have what we call the state champion. And I'm very proud to be part of my particular district's state champion, District 9 here in New Jersey.
I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us tonight, for all of your insight, and of course for all that what you do as advocates every day. We truly appreciate it. So thank you again. Thanks, Lauren and Jeff, for sharing your story and experiences in Alzheimer's advocacy. You really do inspire us to be better advocates. I also want to encourage all advocates joining us tonight to reach out to the public policy staff in your state to get involved. You heard a little bit about some of the programs we have. Learn about your state advocacy days. Sign up to be a state champion. Join an Alzheimer's congressional team and more. We need you, and we need your voice, and your public policy staff in your state will be your guide and partner through this journey. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Harry Johns, President and CEO of the Alzheimer's Association and the Alzheimer's Impact Movement. Stay with us after Harry's remarks to find out the results of our last poll, and hear about immediate actions that you can take to move our mission forward. Now, I'll turn it over to Harry.
Thanks so much, John. It's great to be with all of you this evening, and I want to thank all of our speakers, David and Nelita and Jeff and Joel and Brad, everyone, Lieutenant Governor Stratton. I especially want to thank Jeff for being a spokesperson at a recent listening event with the FDA. You know, you've heard tonight, and so many of you already knew, all of these successes, the advances we've made together. And they're thanks to you, as others have said, you individually and you collectively, what we've all been able to do together that none of us singularly could do, that the association and AIM can make happen because of you and again together. You know, NAPA really did change the course of things, and credit to Rob and his entire staff who you have seen here and others, and again, everyone who's been involved in that. You know the advances we've made in legislation just this year and since NAPA was passed. Really, 85% of the money now being spent each and every year in federal funding for research is as a result of that work. What a change. But we also know, I know all too well, my mom had the disease. My wife, Cindy, her mom had it, and her mom had it. So we all know we've got to change the course. We've got to get to that first survivor. Jeff, again, spoke at that FDA listening session the association arranged last week to talk about what it's like to live with Alzheimer's. And of course, he did a great job telling his story, as did many others. The FDA needed to hear that. They are considering a drug right now that could be the first to change the underlying course of disease. They will make that decision soon, and we wanted to be sure through our regulatory advocacy, not just our legislative advocacy, that they heard those messages. You, again, make all of these things possible. You know that the association in its other work provides leadership across all that happens in Alzheimer's, in raising the discussion in communities, in advancing the research directly, worldwide as the leader, and of course, again, in advocacy and public policy. So I thank you for making all of that possible, and I look forward to working with you. I wish we could be together, but I look forward to working with you in this year, and as we can get back together, when we can have that next forum. But until then, that we advance the things that have been discussed this evening in the ways that you know how to do, the ways that we can together again do that can't be done by others and have to be done so that we can realize that vision of ours of a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementia. And I am confident we can, working together, and I look forward again to doing that with you in this year and beyond. Thank you so much. Back to you, John.
Harry, thanks so much. We appreciate your leadership, and we look forward to hearing from you throughout the year as you work with state and congressional leaders. Now, for the results of our third and final poll question tonight, we ask, what is your favorite way to engage with your elected officials? And here's what you said. The vast majority of you said that you like to meet in person, and absolutely, because we know that is the most confident and best way to drive home our message, meeting in person with staff and with members of Congress. I am thrilled to see that there are a few of you, though, that are still enjoying Zoom. You don't quite have Zoom fatigue, and that's good because it is still going to be a way that we communicate and engage lawmakers this year. But fear not, for all of you, like me, who have Zoom fatigue, we're going to tell you about how you can get involved and stay engaged throughout the year. Tonight's kickoff has been important and I hope inspiring, but what's most important is what we do as advocates tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. Alzheimer's advocacy is not just a once-a-year opportunity. It takes a lot of time to create lasting change, develop relationships with elected leaders, and create opportunities to lift our voices. As you heard from Rachel Conant earlier, the Association and AIM have an exciting agenda before the 117th Congress, and we need your support. In the coming weeks, we're going to be offering educational training on each one of our federal priorities, and we'll share how you can move them forward in Congress. We hope that all of you will participate in these training sessions, as well as your state advocacy day this year. So be on the lookout for more information about these opportunities in your email inbox in the next few weeks. We're also thrilled to announce tonight that we'll be hosting a virtual advocacy forum on May 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern. While we're disappointed that we won't be together in person in Washington this spring, we're excited to keep our momentum going and give access to every advocate across the nation to participate in forum. You'll receive more information about the 2021 AIM Virtual Advocacy Forum in the coming months, but mark your calendars now for May 19th at 7 p.m. Now, I know many of you are ready to get started, and we're excited as well. One way to make your voice heard and take immediate action on Capitol Hill is by asking your members of Congress to join the bipartisan Alzheimer's Congressional Task Force. At the beginning of every Congress, members have an opportunity to join or rejoin the task force and show their support for our cause. Tomorrow, you all will receive an email with a link to take action and ask your members of Congress to join that task force. If you can't wait until tomorrow, you can go ahead and find that information about the task force, as well as other advocacy materials, on AIM's website at allsimpact.org. There you'll find information about the task force, sample letter to the editor that you can submit to your own local newspaper, the latest version of our Advocates Guide, which we'll be updating throughout the year, as well as a link to take action and ask your members to join the Alzheimer's Congressional Task Force. You can also report all of your engagement activities on allsimpact.org. Reporting these interactions and engagements with elected officials and their staff is critical information that Association and AIM staff need as they continue those conversations. Of course, if you have any questions about how to take action or report them, or if you have questions about tonight's event, please make sure to reach out to your public policy staff partner in your state. On behalf of the Alzheimer's Association and AIM, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I especially want to thank all of the advocates, including David Hyde Pierce, who kicked us off tonight, for their inspiring words. Be on the lookout for more information about upcoming training sessions on our federal priorities and other events in our Advocacy Forum series, including May 19th. So go out, make your voice heard in 2021. Thank you all so much. Stay safe, take care of each other, and have a great night.